Hey, everybody, welcome back to another episode of Outside Looking In, the series where I talk to 29 people to kind of get a consensus from their point of view on who the Raptors are, what are they doing. So you get to be like, hey, people comment on my team. That's interesting. And then additionally, we sneak in info about the other 29 teams so that you, as a fan, after all these episodes come out as a really well-rounded fan on the NBA at large. And today, the Miami Heat, a pseudo rivalry with the Raptors. Maybe it's there, maybe it isn't. They had great games last year. But to discuss it with me, Nekias Duncan, of course, of Basketball News, NBA, WNBA Words Over There, and the Dunker Spot podcast, which is, for many people, the goated league-wide podcast. So I'm curious, Nekias, how the hell are you doing? Heck, I should say, probably.
I am doing okay, man. I'm doing okay. Like basketball always makes me happy. Also, it's just been a lot of basketball to watch. This was we talked about the podcast a little bit, but this was the first full season of the Dunker Spot, and we have flown straight from NBA playoff content right into the WNBA season, and we're in the WNBA playoffs right now. And NBA training camp is right around the corner. Preseason ball's coming right up, so we're just driving. We're just driving. We're doing the best that we can. Having a lot of fun with it though.
All gas, no brakes. And I think that's kind of, that's the way it always shakes out when you do the W and the NBA. It's like, oh yeah, there's never ever a break from anything. It's just go, 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 go. If you could get there are rumors around that one of the best basketball games in history was played recently. If you could just give me like the Cliff Notes version of that W game.
Oh man, absolute nonsense is what I shouldn't say absolute nonsense. Absolute madness is what that basketball game was, particularly I'd say just the last 2 minutes of this game. 2 minutes of the fourth quarter, then overtime, where the Las Vegas Aces outscored the Storm by 12 points in the overtime, which is generally not how overtime games are supposed to go. But yeah, the last 2 minutes featured Breanna Stewart, who is, I think, the best player in the W. She had been cold for most of that game. She just turns into a killer late in the game. Asia Wilson is matching her bucket for bucket. There's like a missed travel call. We get a go-ahead three-pointer with under a second left from Sue Bird, who's retiring this year. And then we get a game-tying bucket from Jackie Young over a very good defensive center in Ezzy Matbagor, who just does not contest the shot at all, like actually has her hands behind her back as Jackie goes up for the layup with 0.8 of a second left. And everyone's like, wait, why didn't she contest the shot? She didn't want to foul, obviously, but it just looks wild. And then the Aces just blast the Storm in overtime. But I really can't even do it justice. Like, watch that entire game. It's what basketball is supposed to be about, aside from the non-contest and the missed travel. But it was great stuff.
One of the things about the W is just like the connective passing blows my mind, dude.
Oh, yeah.
It clears the NBA by a mile for me. You see some of those passes where in the NBA it's like a guy will punch a gap, and in the W they're like, we're gonna let the ball do the work. You see these passes from like somebody will get the ball under the rim, and then it goes straight out to the 3-point line because they shoot the ball so well, and they go straight out to the 3-point line. And then maybe even you might get like a feed back under the rim depending on how the defense responds. It's rapid. The reads they make, just fantastic. Speaking of reads, Miami Heat, Raptors. There's supposed to be a lot of read and react between these two teams, but we're going to focus on, I guess, the former, at least to start this podcast. The Heat, for many people, are in that top three of the Eastern Conference, that contender tier. It's Miami, it's Philly. Well, I guess Miami, Philly, Milwaukee, Boston. Maybe we think about, I guess, the Cavs, depending on how the Donovan Mitchell thing goes. But I'm very curious how you view the Heat's version of like a contender. Do they belong in that conversation? And what would have to break right for them to maintain that or ascend above it?
I think generally, if we're looking at the Eastern Conference in tiers, like I would put Miami in that 1.5 tier, maybe a little too good for the second tier, but not quite. This is the team that's coming out of the East for me. Like, I think that should be reserved for Milwaukee and Boston right now. I would also have like Philly in that 1.5 tier as well, because like the talent is there, but we just have to see if they're going to stay healthy, what James Harden is going to look like, if Joel Embiid can hold up, things of that nature. We're not going to do a Philly pod here, but I think that's kind of where I land with Miami. Like, they have the best coach in basketball, in my opinion. they have one of, if not the most versatile defense in basketball. They have a strong defensive infrastructure. They have a player in Jimmy Butler who can ascend to that top 7, top 8 level when he's on. And we saw that throughout the postseason. And so they have the skeleton of a contender. But there are enough question marks, enough chinks in the armor, particularly offensively, to where you're like, okay, wait. They're very much, they can do it if they get a break versus they can just do it. And I think the Heat fans in particular have been waiting on the Heat to make the trade or the signing that puts them in the we can do it camp firmly. And that hasn't happened with the Kevin Durant talks that went nowhere, the Donovan Mitchell talks that kind of went somewhere but didn't really go anywhere, or maybe an offer wasn't made. We don't know. There's so much reporting out there. Who can say? There just hasn't been that move yet. And I feel like there's a lot of angst in the fan base because that move hasn't been made. But the skeleton still remains. Like, even got to remember, they were a missed Jimmy Butler 3 and a couple more breaks from going to the finals this past season. Like, they were just right there. And so, again, like, I don't think they're far off, but I do think there's the move that needs to be made at some point.
And so we won't do the trade thing because I feel like the trade talks have been exhausted this summer.
Yes.
There's been so much of it. So with the roster currently as constructed, is there progressions, developments that could happen, not necessarily likely to, but that could happen that would put you in they can do it tier rather than the 1.5?
Yeah, like, I think there's enough young talent to where you can kind of foresee something being made of. Like Tyler Herro in particular, we got to see, one, if he's getting extended before the deadline, or if the Heat are going to try to wait it out this year and see if someone else pops open to try to make a big trade midway through the season. We just don't know yet. And that concludes my trade talk for the rest of this episode. But they're going to be looking at how Tyler Herro develops on the ball. And once again, the eye kind of has to go to Bam Adebayo, who is one of the best players in the NBA, one of the best defenders in the sport, a guy that can be used in a multitude of ways offensively, but he hasn't become that firm number 2 scorer. And because he hasn't become that firm number 2 scorer, that puts a little bit more pressure on Tyler Herro to be that guy. Or Miami acquired Kyle Lowry last season, hopefully that he could kind of fill in that gap in spots throughout the postseason if he's healthy. But those kind of questions go away if Bam just kind of steps into it. One thing I've consistently said about Bam is that he may not be the best player. You know, there's been a little bit of debate between him and Jimmy Butler at different parts of the last couple of seasons. But Bam Adebayo is the one player on the roster who, in theory, just has an advantage every time he steps on the court. He's going to be quicker than your 5. He's going to be bigger than your 4. He's the guy that should be the mismatch. And we've seen it in spurts for him, to where he just takes over. He has the mid-range jumper going, or he's just living at the free throw line. He's been a high free throw rate guy literally his entire career. They met to the rookie season. That was one of the things that stood out to me when I was doing some deep film watch on him and some stat research on him after his rookie season. Like, wait, why does he have like a 21 free throw rate? You don't typically see that. So, like, that's been there his entire career. And we've seen when he takes over and he has that aggressive mindset, there isn't much you can do with him. But we also see him searching for guys to hand the ball off to and passing up open mid-range shots and pump faking against larger centers and then passing the ball out. And it's like, if you're going to be an all NBA caliber guy, if you're going to be our number 2, we have to count on these points. It's got to be 17 to 20 a night, or at the very least, the aggression to get 17 or 20 a night has to be there. And so that's, once again, I feel the biggest question mark in terms of, can the Heat reach true contender status? Can Bam take that step?
That brings up a few questions for me. Well, one statement, my opinion on Kyle Lowry at this point is like maybe 1 game out of 7 you would get that, but he exists probably on the Heat to be the guy who, if the other team is transitioning between schemes, Kyle should be on the court to sniff out the advantages that are starting to pop up earlier than other players. And then also his connective passing when advantage is created is still, you know, he's one of the best in the league. Like you get the defense to shift back to weak side, and then he finds the guy creeping in on the strong side. And then everyone's like, oh yeah, that passing lane was there. What the, you know, and Herro, I want to ask you about the on-ball juice a little bit, but the Bam thing, it's interesting because the usage sits a little bit lower, but the amount of reads he has to process through is up there with anybody in the NBA. He's just constantly, everything's going through that brain of his. I'm curious Is there an ideal way that you'd like to see him developed or used? Is it mostly what we're seeing currently, or would you like to see tweaks made?
Um, I always find myself in this weird spot with Bam because depending on which game you watch, your answer kind of changes.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's like, hey, it would be nice if Bam would just look at the basket. You can't scheme that up. You just gotta go and get it sometimes. If you have a mismatch, don't immediately look for the handoff just because that's the read that you're generally supposed to make in the situation. Go get yours. There are other times where it's like, okay, what do they have Bam doing exactly? Why is he just chilling in the dunker spot now? Why is it one handoff and he just kind of spaces in the mid-range area? That's not helping anyone, particularly Jimmy Butler, who also likes to operate like 17 feet and in. That's not helping if you're going to utilize him in that way. One thing that was kind of expected from me, but not to the degree it was, like Bam's assists per game, if you want to look at the box score, dropped quite a bit from last season. And that's because you have Kyle Lowry making more of those playmaking reads when he's there. But like I would like for there to be a better balance to be struck there, but a lot of this still boils down to, okay, Bam, you just got to go get it sometimes. Like the Heat trust you. You are able to operate in as many handoffs and post actions as you do because the Heat trust you to make decisions. If you're being trusted with making decisions, call your number. Like you can do that. You're not the point guard that brings it up every time. So there's a limit, but you're good. You're really freaking good at basketball. You are a walking mismatch when you turn that mindset on. So I think I lean more towards he has to kind of make that adjustment. And like the mid-range shooting was a little bit down from last year as well. So like there's just improvement that needs to be made on his end as well. But it's mostly mindset, I feel like.
So you don't see deficiencies in his game that if he were to start, like the finishing, you believe would support that more aggressive decision making. Some of the in between shots would support more aggressive decision making.
Yeah, like again, there's room. He's not a perfect player. Like I do
Mhm.
think the mid-range jumper needs to be a little bit better. Like he's in that low 40s range, which isn't enough to bend your defense. And if you want to look at it through a more statistical lens, like that's not enough for it to be a quote unquote good shot. You
Mhm.
want him in the mid 40s. And with the way defenses defend him, I can understand where he gets in this loop. Like, okay, I'm open, but also they're leaving me open for a reason. So let me look for something better. But I do think just him being more willing to take some of those shots because he's not a bad mid-range shooter. Taking more of those shots are going to force the big to step up just a little bit higher. That's going to open up more driving lanes for him. And again, he's been a high free throw rate guy his entire career. Like that's going to help get the Heat some fruitful offense. So I think there's room to be made there. Of course, I would love to see better finishing against size. Like I think a lot of the hesitancy really comes there to where he's just pump faking into oblivion because he's facing a true 7-footer. So more craft being made there would be nice to see. I know the obvious one is going to be like, hey, it would be nice if he had a 3 ball, but like I just want him to take mid-rangers consistently before we get there.
That's one of the best things I think is it exists both on the Raptors and on the Heat is that the answer of like just develop a 3 ball has, well, it also exists on the Bulls, but you look at Pascal Siakam, Jimmy Butler, and DeMar DeRozan, who all say, you really think it does? Because I think there's a lot of room to find, success in like inside the arc.
Mhm.
Uh, Tyler Herro, a guy who, man, very, very divisive typically between people's opinions on him. I think Tyler, I'm not just like a white kid who's like, sees another white guy have some on ball juice and I'm like really happy about it. But I do think that playmaking reads, pull up shooting, uses the extra dribble to manipulate when he's going downhill a lot of the time. Like he has a lot of the hallmarks of guys who can take on that extra usage and was as the Heat did the most insane thing by having a different leading scorer in round 1, round 2, round 3, and round 4 as they went to the finals, which is Bam, Goran, Herro, and Jimmy, which is insane, first of all. But I see Tyler as a guy who you can ratchet up the usage and probably not see a dip in efficiency either. I'm curious where you stand on the Herro of it all.
I firmly it's funny, like I got the early rep as like the Herro hater because I didn't like the pick when it was made live. So I'm still eating some of that. But ultimately, like I think he's a good basketball player. I think we have to start there with him, which is not extreme elite analysis, but like he's good at basketball. The pull-up shooting is very important. He does make positive passing reads. He's not afraid to throw skip passes. He's not an elite one by any means, but you are starting to see some manipulation from him. You love the pacing from him. This is why he's such an effective scorer in the mid-range area. He has the shooting touch, but also has if you want to use an elite skill for him, he has elite footwork. Like there aren't many players in the NBA that have better footwork and better shot prep than Tyler Herro does. And that allows him to knock down the tough shots that he makes. Part of the issue I have with him is that it feels like he has to live on a tough diet to a certain extent. He has improved his ability to get to the rim throughout his career, but it's not a high mark at all. He's not a guy that if he drives, he's drawing an extra defender. And so that kind of limits what you want him to be if you want him to be like the official hub of your offense. And again, if Bam takes that step, you don't need Herro to be that guy. But part of my, I guess, drawback with the Heat, even when they were playing super well during the regular season, was I'm kind of worried in the playoffs because once you get to half court basketball, like he might be your best pull-up option in the half court. And I don't want my third, or depending on how you feel about Kyle Lowry, I don't want my fourth best player being my best scoring option once you get into a playoff setting. And that was kind of the setup for the Heat last year. And even though they made it to the Eastern Conference Finals, you saw as much as Boston switched or they're throwing some zone or whatever, Boston played a lot more drop coverage in the Eastern Conference Finals than I think many people anticipated. And the Heat pushed it to 7 and almost won the series. But if Tyler Herro was healthy enough to knock down those shots that the Heat got and dropped, the Heat are in the finals. Just point blank, period. And so the fact that Herro was relied on to do that and couldn't because of health, but they didn't have a lot of other guys that could do that comfortably and be relied on and not be blasted on the other end of the floor, which is why you didn't see a lot of Duncan Robinson. Like, that's just a tough dichotomy to have. But back to Herro, like, he is their drop killer right now. And I do think if he's able to get stronger, if he's able to have more of a presence in the rim, if he's able to get to the line a little bit more or just get deep paint touches more consistently, because he does have the vision to make basic reads out of that, like, I think that's an obvious step for him to make. And I think he can make that this season.
Okay. Very insightful. On to the other side of the aisle, the Raptors. I've done many episodes of this series so far. Nobody has said they're boring yet. And that fits for sure. I'm curious what your broad stroke thoughts are, the flashbulb stuff on the Raptors.
Oh man, yeah, this isn't gonna help the Raptor fan allegations, is it? I would say, like, honestly, as someone that loves defense and has dug deeper into learning about defense over the last 2-3 years, like my professional life, like the Raptors are so fun to watch because they do literally everything. They don't just play zone; they throw out 4 different types of zone within the same quarter. Like,
well, and they'll switch on possession. Like they'll go hybrid, yeah.
And so, like, just being able to track all that stuff, like, I can't remember who I was having this conversation with, but I made the point, like, if you're trying to learn about defense, like, being a Heat fan or being a Raptor fan, like, you're pretty much in heaven. Like, you have 82 plus opportunities just to learn about defensive rotations, like why you can or why you shouldn't help from the strong side, because the Heat and the Raptors are both teams that aren't afraid to show that strong side help and do so aggressively and then X out behind that. And it's a whole lot of control madness from the Raptors. So I just generally enjoy watching them defensively. And then you hone in on the individual players. Like Scotty Barnes is a joy. I am still very much on the OG train. Like, I wrote a piece last offseason, did part of my Something to Prove series, like a guy that a team is looking forward to break out. And I thought, like, Scotty Barnes was I don't have an official ballot, but Scotty Barnes was my most improved pick before the year. Like, I think he can do it. Like, he's shown enough offensively, shown enough flashes as a self-creator. Like, okay, if he can build upon this, like, you really have something because you know what he can do defensively. But OG's fun, Scotty's fun, Pascal is fun. It's a fun group for me to watch for the most part until they get in these lows in the half court. And with how are we talking about Nick Nurse on this podcast?
Yeah. Oh man, we've been talking about it for sure.
As creative as he is defensively, I don't understand. I don't understand the offensive process sometimes. And like, I get some of that is personnel driven because how many we have to grab this guy's jersey shooters do the Raptors have on the roster? Like, not many. And so that kind of hamstrings what you want to do sometimes. But there are too many funky players for the offense from a design standpoint to be as bland as it is sometimes. And this has been a through line through his tenure, I feel like. Mm-hmm. And so, like, I just don't know. Like, is there an offensive coordinator needed there? Is it just like I would like to see better there.
Seems to me like he's the term would be a Kyle Lowry merchant, maybe, as far as like offensive, because that's Kyle Lowry Daryl Morey traded Kyle Lowry and then issued like the Harden ball, Rockets ball, whatever. And he traded the point guard he needed to exact like his efficiency, the thing that he wanted. The Raptors were consistently like rim 3-pointers. That's the kind of Kyle he'll make it move for you, and especially during his prime. And Nick Nurse got the tail end of that. And now it looks a little funky in the light. You know what I mean? There's a lot of isolation. And this is something I talked about with Caitlin Cooper, especially. She was kind of trying to, with her, beautiful basketball brain, is trying to concoct these ideas that, hey, the Raptors score a ton out of the post, like as far as points per possession, and the episode will be out already, so I'm not, stealing your stuff, but I think it was 1.05 points per possession if OG, Pascal, or Scotty are passing out of the post, which was their most efficient play type. And yet they run no secondary actions for their post stuff. Basically, they're just like, hey, do stuff. You could run. And then, so of course she was like, hey, the Pacers did this as far as out of the post. The Raptors have done this in the past. Why isn't this happening? And so, yeah, there's meat on the bone. I think that much is clear. You're picking up on something real there. Yeah. It's very tough bridge to get gap to something. Anyway, there's a saying that's available there. I brought up Pascal and Jimmy as far as navigating the interior of defenses. Lero, our mutual pal, brought this up on the Chicago podcast, and it really piqued my interest. Why aren't there more Pascal and Jimmy comparisons? Not that comps are great, but when I say that out loud, does something in your mind go, and then go no? Or does it say, yeah?
I like the question because it's a comp that I literally haven't heard until now. So I guess that kind of blends into the question. Like they do operate in some of the same areas. Like it's funny because like Pascal gets the memes for the spin moves, but I do feel like he's a strength-based driver. Like I don't think he gets enough credit for the way that he's able to create leverage when he drives to the basket. And Jimmy uses a lot of that. Again, it's brute strength for Jimmy, but Pascal's as wiry as he is. He's a strong dude, and he's not afraid to get. That's part of why the spin move works. He gets you off balance, but he's also able to get that shoulder into your chest and get a little bit of extra space, and he's able to extend from there. That's,
So I'll explain I'll explain it from my point of view. Is that when I was doing that top 100 series, that was so stupid because nobody wants to read a top 100 series that comes from Raptors Republic. I should have been able to get out of it. But anyway, Jimmy, I think I had him number 12, and this was before the Heat made their final run. And my big takeaway was that Jimmy is like the platonic ideal of a basketball player. He will do everything on the court except shoot the three, except for some meme games where he's like 6 for 8 or something like that. But Jimmy is a guy, he will screen, he will get in the mix, he'll offensive rebound, he'll pass, like he'll make great reads, he'll hit a jumper as long as it's not a 3. He's just doing everything. And then defensively has endless utility as well. And Pascal has carved out a similar platform to perform for himself as well. Like the 3-point shot, he was great from the corners, but how often are the Raptors putting Pascal in the corner? Above the break stuff, yeah, he had trouble, but working on the in-between, the bully drives, the footwork in the middle of the floor, creating as a passer from there, the defense as well. It's not 1-to-1. It's not like an easy comp, but I see it as if I had to pick another star who shares the most similarities in play style, I would actually pick Jimmy for Pascal.
That's an interesting one. Like that's Now I got to sit on this for a little bit. You have made me think.
It's not perfect, but it did pique my interest. So I wanted to bounce it off of somebody. So I figured I'd wait for the Miami pod. So you talked about, of course, how both teams pull off the strong side corner. Both teams throw a lot of different looks, and the Raptors, as far as this scheme, I think they are a little bit more aggressive, but they also have different personnel. I'm curious when you look at these two defenses and you see, both have had very good stretches. Both ended up in decent spots at the end of the year. I'm curious if you could steal from one to the other, what would you want the other team to emulate? Raptors to Heat, Heat to Raptors, anything really?
Honestly, Any suggestion I would have, like, I feel like it's personnel based. Like, I
Yeah.
feel like I've had stretches where I'm watching the Heat, particularly during the finals run, where I'm just like, okay, I understand that you want to switch. Do you have to switch this though? Like, the screen wasn't even set. You don't have to do that. And if anything, like, I would like the Heat to be more selective with their switching sometimes. Like, fight over. Like, I'd rather see a peel switch than an early switch. I feel like I think the Raptors are really good at those, but also they're not bigger than they're longer across the board, so it's a little bit easier for the Raptors to navigate those types of things. Beyond that, do the Raptors care about corner threes at all? Like, I do feel like both teams pull from the strong side corner, but the Raptors very much sell out from there in a way
They're
that I don't
more
think
they're
the Heat
more
do.
flagrant. Yes, I'd
Yeah.
agree.
So, like, if you want to dial that down like 4%, then maybe you don't have the early stretch where it's like, wait, why aren't the Raptors a top 10 defense? And then they ended up there anyway. Like, that can be some fine tuning. But I always find myself in a loop with that too. Because I'm like, how much of this is, this isn't what you want to do, but you're trying to make your team be active. You're trying to build those habits. So it may be a little bit extreme first before you can get into the nuances. And how much of it is just, this is their habit. And so with the Raptors, like, I never really know how much, like, what side of the aisle they're on in that regard. But yeah, like, I think if there's anything to critique, it would just be like, okay, y'all really sell from that strong side corner. It puts you in trouble against teams that can actually shoot. So dial that down a little bit. You can still maintain your aggression without putting yourself in the bind as often. Like, the Raptors are, talk about the fun of their defense. They're able to peel in that aggressively because they close out better than just about any team in the NBA. And that helps when you have that kind of personnel. Like, that's a lot of limb flying at you. So they can afford to peel it off. But like, I don't know. Like, you can dial that down a little bit, I feel like.
Well, they also don't have Precious. Who knows what it looks like next year, because Precious not only had a lot of success stepping out on guys, but also had a ton of success in drop at the level hedge. Like, just was a really great and wonderful pick and roll defender. But they don't have Bam. And so the democratic rim protection that they participate in, that's part of the corner thing. And there are coaches, I've talked to coaches who say the principles are the principles. So you pull off the strong side corner, then you pull off the strong side corner, you force middle, you force baseline, all that kind of stuff. And then I've talked to coaches who say, well, who's on the other side of these actions? Like, do you pull off the strong side corner if it's Duncan Robinson, if Max Strus, whoever, right? Like PJ Tucker, all these different guys. You decide based on that. And some coaches are like, nope, the scheme is the scheme. You run it and you try and make up for it. And some are like, well, we'll ask our players to make those interpretations live on the floor. And I guess ideally it would be the second. Like, you'd say my players can make the decision. But then that adds like I think a difficult decision-making overlay live in an NBA game to constantly be filtering through. But I guess great defenses definitely do that for sure. But yeah, I'm not an NBA coach, so I have trouble suggesting to, like, hey, if OG has a guy, don't peel switch. Like, let OG, like, OG shouldn't be like, oh, I guess he kind of has like a toe in front of me. I'll filter out to the corner and Chris Boucher will step in. It's like, why couldn't Chris Boucher stay in the corner? And why couldn't OG just try and stick a guy? Because we've seen that, and that works a lot of the time. Yeah. That's the interesting aspect. Are there any limitations when you watch the Heat and you're like, okay, well, I guess the switching thing you brought up, that's the interesting thing. Yeah. Some teams switch too much. And this is what I talk about with Caitlin, is like, switching is not complex. It is not the complex form of defense. And people think because they're like, oh yeah, that's peak defense. Switching is lazy.
Like, it's we talk about drop, like, switching is the most conservative defense out there. And like, I don't think it's described as that. Like, drop, you still have a big navigating space. You have a guard fighting over a screen and trying to stay attached to a ball handler's hip, or ideally getting back in front. Switch is just, okay, the action's here. I'm just going to stand in this spot. You're going to come to me now. And again, if you have a personnel like the Raptors where you can throw out, if you want to, like 5 different guys between 6'6" and 6'9", then yeah, that makes it a little bit easier. Or Boston in particular, who can kind of switch whatever they want to when they have their bigger lineup in. But yeah, like, it's a conservative scheme by nature because you're not fighting over screens. Ideally, you're just trying to eliminate whatever advantage is being created from that screen. So I just want a little bit more nuance. And just to go off your earlier point about maybe it's, the principle is the principle versus making those live reads. I think that's why I enjoy Nick Nurse overall, because like I feel like the latter and having more, okay, we help out the strong side if it's this guy, but not if it's this guy. Like those feel like playoff like scouting reports and adjustments generally. And the Raptors are pulling those kind of things off during the regular season.
That makes sense. And the easiest example is the Matisse Thybulle games regular season versus Matisse Thybulle games in the playoffs, I think is the way to look at that. Yeah. You talked about OG earlier, and you and I were in the exact same boat. We both wrote pieces about like mine was that if the Raptors are succeeding, if OG is healthy, I think he might have a shot at an all-star game. A couple of things infringed upon that. OG participating in workout ball way too often definitely harmed his isolation production and other parts of the game. Pascal came back earlier and OG wasn't healthy. But looking back, the all-star prediction was probably strong. I'm curious if we're picking breakout candidates for the Raptors this year. Precious is probably the most in vogue.
Mm-hmm.
We have these things, we filter through like, okay, this guy's fun to root for now in fandom, in, narrative. It's like OG he's passed the conversation happened and it didn't happen. So people are like, okay, forget it. It's still maybe on the table. I'm curious what you think about that.
Like I do think it's still on the table. Like from a skill perspective, like he obviously has time to improve. And like as ugly as the start of the season was for him, like it was intriguing to see like his footwork was better. Like he could get to his pull up easier. He can get to the side step easier. The shots didn't always go in. And when he decided to take those shots weren't always great. That's just the natural process of, oh wait, I have the ball in my hands more. Now I have to make live reads versus the drilled stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So like that decision making has to improve. He just needs live reps for that. But I do think it's encouraging. Like the strength based drives from OG are always going to be there. He's just a tank. That's just what he could do.
Mm-hmm.
Like this is why he's such an effective screener and a roll man in pick and roll. Because like he understands those angles, and if you give him the ball on the move, good luck killing his momentum when he's driving towards you, because he's going to be stronger than you 90% of the time. So like that's there, and it's encouraging to me that the footwork got better in terms of the pull-ups and the side steps and the step backs. And so if he's able to blend that in together, I think he can be a more well-rounded offensive player. Now, whether that turns into an award, an all-star or most improved player, I don't know, because when you add Scotty Barnes to the mix and he just won Rookie of the Year, like I don't think we're going to get a 25 usage season from OG at this point, particularly if everyone's healthy. So I don't know if you see it in the box score numbers and see a big leap there, but I do think you can see a more efficient OG. I think he can be more effective with those micro skills. And if he's put back in a position to where he's attacking tilted defenses more versus having to set the table like he did earlier in the season, yeah, the efficiency is going to be up. It just gives him more counters in the half court.
That's exactly it. I think even if OG doesn't progress to the level where he's adding wins by doing this kind of stuff, I don't really care, because I thought it was overwhelmingly obvious against the 76ers that Fred wasn't going to attack a closeout. Neither was Gary Trent Jr. Scotty was injured. And you look at a team like the Raptors, who they want to be able to attack tilted defenses, and they have to have shooting to bend them. They have to have Pascal on ball to bend them. But if they're just going to be stuck out beyond the 3-point line, you're going to lose in the playoffs. And OG and Precious, to a lesser degree, were guys who would punch that gap and make a read going downhill as a passer or get all the way to the rim. And OG, this is just let a guy, even if you're not doing the Bucks thing before they won the championship, which is like, we play our style, we know how to win regular season basketball. It's like, indulge in the weirder stuff so that you can be weird during the playoffs in a pinch. And OG is a guy who I would take those less than ideal isolations if A, it allows him to stretch his legs, keep him happy, and B, if he's willing to look at himself come playoff time and say, okay, I'm excellent attacking closeouts, I hit catch and shoot threes, I'm maybe the best roller on the team, and like I have endless utility in other ways. I've been stretching my legs, it didn't work for me, I'll dial it back and we'll do this. And then like in a pinch, maybe all those possessions are more valuable in the playoffs, because I think the Raptors are a playoff team. let OG be weird and try stuff. I don't think that's going to get you out of the playoffs, and see what happens come, playoff time. That's the wisdom I would kind of sit upon, I guess.
I think I'm with you there because, like, if you're looking at it in a playoff setting, ideally, OG, if he's in the starting lineup, which I want to get your thoughts on what Toronto's starting lineup is going to be this year, but if you have him in the starting lineup, OG is going to be getting a team's third best defender,
maybe fourth.
So, like, yeah, I think it'll be useful during the regular season. Like, okay, here are some possessions. It's not, again, back to the nurse point, it's not like they're running exotic stuff anyway. So, like, if you're gonna let guys devolve into do stuff, like, yeah, let OG do some stuff. So then when you get in the playoff setting and teams are more prepared for whatever you do run, if the playoffs become, can I abuse your fourth best player more? The Raptors are going to be very well equipped for that kind of setup because their fourth best guy is going to be like OG Anunoby, who could just overpower you or shoot or drive into you. Like, those opportunities are going to be there. You don't want to win an entire playoff series on the margins to that degree, and it's never going to be that simple. But, like, that seems to be like some low-hanging fruit to grab in a way.
You know that video that he got away with it, but he ain't get away with it?
Yeah.
Nick Nurse, when you did that interview talking about OG and you said, I just let guys do their thing. If you get a defensive rebound, you can have that possession. Why did people think that was an okay response? What do you get, 4 a game? Who let him get away with it? Like, oh yeah, OG can have these 4 possessions. Everyone's like, oh, I see the wisdom in that. 4? What do you like? Yeah. Anyway, we're completely agreed. If you get to like kind of abuse a guy as far as like in the fourth or whatever, you're looking at weaker defenders. I think that makes a lot of sense. But yeah, and as far as like the exotic stuff is like, oh yeah, will Nick Nurse, it's not like he has to get super creative and start drawing up stuff. Nick Nurse giving a guy a ball is like, go to the 45 extended. Yeah, stand there. Okay, if the guy's spacing out can kind of figure out how to lift and stuff, this is what we're running. It's not like, it's not asking a bunch. So yeah, I certainly don't mind it. Even if it means they lose some minutes, some possessions during the regular season, I expect them, and especially like if they want to run those no guard lineups, you might as well try OG doing some guard adjacent stuff, because it can't just be Helio Siakam like it was. I mean, Siakam miraculously held up over the course of the season. I don't know how. He's like a superhuman, but you don't want to run Fred down again. Okay, you asked me about the starting lineup thing. Can I add caveats, or do I need to be a straight shooter?
You can go through the caveats. There's just so much.
Okay, so the biggest caveat is the fantastical, wonderful, Precious Achiuwa. That is the biggest one. So his post All-Star break featured, per 36, it was more catch and shoot 3 attempts than Gary Trent Jr. But he played 25 minutes per game. Per game, 4 catch and shoot attempts. He shot 40%. That's Precious Achiuwa's post All-Star bag, because Precious Achiuwa against an advantage closeout is kind of like a bomb heading down towards the rim. It was awesome. He had a lot of outstanding plays. The passing wasn't there, but it didn't need to be, because they're like, oh yeah, it's Precious. And then all of a sudden it's on your head. So, and a lot of those were above the break, which is the type of spacing that the Raptors, in their arrogance, were like, for 5 years now, are like, we can teach anybody to shoot a corner 3. And then the NBA, of course, was like, hey, we got really good at running guys off the line. What now? And they're like, oh God, okay, let me rethink this. So if Precious is hitting his above the break threes, it's Precious at the 5, like all day, every day. And he just has to hit like 32, 33% above the break. And that's what I'm running with. If he's not hitting that, it just has to be Gary. That's my opinion. Is that a fair caveat?
I think that's fair. So in that setup, with the Precious setup in particular, you would be looking at, I guess, Fred, OG. Who would you have in that 5? To make sure I'm not blanking on anyone.
Precious, Pascal, OG, Fred, and Scotty.
Okay.
And that's not like the Scotty isn't the point guard in that line.
Yeah, I got
that's the 5. Yeah.
Okay.
How about you? From the outside looking in, do you have an ideal 5? Let's do before we get out of here, let's do starting 5, closing 5, and then that'll be that.
That's the fun. Okay. Man. So I guess starting 5, like Pascal's in, Scotty's in, Fred is in, I think you have to have OG in.
I think so too.
And then I guess the bench thing for me kind of goes into, all right, how much do we believe in Malachi Flynn?
Do you love pro-am footage? Is that your bag?
I don't know if that's my portion, but frankly, I just was not expecting the defensive season that I saw from Gary Trent Jr. last year. And so, like, if he's able to maintain that level, like the shooting and even just the pull-up shooting, he's a 2-level scorer to me.
Mm-hmm.
But even that's valuable if you're getting if you're able to tilt the defense in some sort of way. Like, he can punch or close out, maybe not get all the way to the rim, but like he can give you that mid-range scoring as well. And so I could see a scenario where you keep him in the starting lineup, and then you just run it up with Precious and Malachi off the bench and kind of spearhead your bench attack that way. Obviously, it's going to be staggering behind that, but you can do that. I guess for me, like, and I end up I've seen quite a bit of Precious with his time in Miami. Then I wrote about his post All-Star break last season. So I guess beyond the shooting, where are you at with him as a rim protector defensively? Because like the switch stuff is good.
He's the best rim protector on the team.
Mm-hmm.
Well, actually, I should say he's the best at forcing misses on the team. It's hard to parse out who's protecting the rim on the Raptors because nobody does it alone.
Mm-hmm.
And Precious has really positive minutes next to Boucher. And that's partly because of that scheme. Like, they're throwing guys at the rim. Precious is also positively correlated with better defensive rebounding. He is probably the best defensive rebounder on the Raptors. He was the best at forcing misses. But this stuff is, because it's that paint protector versus forcing misses thing, is like, can you, by your lonesome, kind of dissuade guys away from the paint?
Mm-hmm.
Definitely, I don't think Precious is really doing that. Guys are willing to go at him. He's done a great job of forcing misses, and was way better in drop than I might have expected, although they didn't go for that much. He's definitely not going to quarterback the defense at this point. I still think he's like this exclamation point among five guys, not this backline, messiah or whatever. Yeah, that's a difficult question. Maybe we're going to get more info on it to some degree this year, but I don't think that I've seen the film to dictate like a yes or no on that probably.
Okay, that's fair. And I guess bouncing off of that, like, how do you feel about him in terms of fouls? Like, do you trust the discipline with him?
This is where I would go. Maybe you start Precious and he's not closing, and maybe he closes if he's in a good foul position. That would be the wisdom, because Gary, if Gary that off the dribble shooting is there, because he's been up and down forever. Yeah. But if it kind of sticks in a positive spot, a lot of the actions that the Raptors love to run feature Gary as a moving piece to kind of keep the defense honest. And if Pascal isn't going to hit above the break threes, even off the catch this year, if OG, depending on what happens with his shot, where he's positioned, Gary may be an absolute necessity offensively. So yeah, that's kind of, I might lean off the start to try out the Precious stuff just because, and then Gary, he can run on the bench and you see how that works for his game. And then, so I'm going long personally, but the other thing is, like, the Raptors loved the no guard bench lineups. They loved going big. And if you put Precious in the starting five, you maybe lose that. And they're still in the portion of figuring out if that's real. Like, they know they win minutes, or if they're winning minutes because it's a change of pace. That's kind of where they're stuck right now, I think.
I got you. And bouncing off of that, and I think I'm good on lineup stuff. I don't want to go too long on your bod. I guess the other thing I have factored in my mind with Gary starting in particular is that, going back to the half court offense, like, the Raptors do enjoy having their guard screen for Pascal or screen for some of their big wings. And so I do worry that if you start Precious over Gary Trent Jr. in particular, like, it does kind of diminish how much you can do with that. Fred becomes really your only inverted option, since everyone else is pretty much the same size. You're going to have worse defenders on certain players, so you can still generate mismatches, but it wouldn't be as drastic, I feel like. And I think the Raptors need to create as many advantages as they can in a half-court setting. And so maybe that's where I'm just like, is Precious good enough to justify switching all that up?
Yeah, that's a really good point. And also speaks to what the Raptors want to lean into, because you look at them and you say, hey, do you want to just do the bully drive post up thing and be the weirdest team in basketball offensively by far? Then put Gary on the bench, and instead of using Gary's gravity, you lean more into, oh, you want to put a 2 on OG and put him in a screening action? We're going to, like, that guy's going under the rim. We'll see how your help principles work from there. And the early returns in the half court are that brand of basketball is not more efficient than the current conventions. So they'd have to get better at it with the players and with the scheming. So yeah, for the listener, we've not offered towards the back end of this podcast many answers, although I think we've posed very interesting questions for sure.
Yeah, this is the fun of the Raptors, man. We don't know. So just a mystery box of a lot of fun pieces. Just don't know how they're going to come together yet, but that's the joy of watching this team.
Yeah. I think that's as great a place to leave it with the Raptors. As far as Miami, is there any parting shots you want to give a mostly Canadian, mostly Raptors fan base listening group? Is there anything you'd want to tell them before we get out of here?
I would just say generally, since I have friends in both fan bases, like y'all are just more alike than you want to give credit to. Like, I don't understand why there's a rivalry, honestly. Like, I feel like these should be the two fan bases that band together more than anything. Like, gang up on Celtic fans if you want to do that. But beyond that, like, again, if you want to learn about defense from a scheme perspective, just become a better or smarter basketball watcher, like, these are your two teams. These are your two. Like, these are the two. These are fun. Beyond that, on the Heat side, like, I hope Bam takes a leap. Shout out Haywood Highsmith, who might be starting at the 4 this year. We'll see. He did have some fun work in summer league, however many grains of salt you would put into that. The Heat believe in him for a reason. And so if he is the day one starter, like, it's going to garner memes because the Heat didn't trade for a star, and now they're starting Haywood Highsmith after losing PJ Tucker. But he might actually do some things. So just keep an eye on that. Beyond that, enjoy your basketball team, man.
There's Pascal Siakam was the meme starter at the 4. He started the first 2 games of his career, then went to the G League and everything. So, there's a route to success for the people who are kind of shoved into, like, oh, I'm in a starting lineup. That's really strange. I didn't see this for myself. And the team's really great. Wow. Nekias, thanks so much for coming on, man. If you want to plug yourself, tell people where to find you, what you have come forward, just let them know.
One, thanks for having me. This is a blast. It's always a pleasure to talk basketball with you, man. Like, you're one of the brightest minds on here, and also just a tremendous person. So everyone should be supporting what you're doing. As far as my self plugs, I hate doing that, but follow me on Twitter at Nekias NBA. If you aren't already, subscribe to the Dunker Spot. We're talking. It's WNBA heavy right now, but the NBA season is ramping up. So we'll be getting into our division previews very, very, very soon. So we will be shifting more to the NBA side soon. If the W isn't your jam, but it should be your jam because it's really good basketball. Can't overstate that enough. Beyond that, written work is at basketballnews.com. I will have, depending on when this is released, I'll have a Mike Conley piece up. I'll have some more WNBA stuff since the playoffs are going on right now. Beyond that, I think that's all I have going on right now.
You may not like doing it, but that's an excellent plug. You let the people. And thank you for the extremely kind words. Listener, I hope you enjoyed this. Viewer, if you're on YouTube, checking this out, make sure to like. That helps. And Nekias, once again, thank you. Listener, thanks for tuning in. We're going to get out of here. Stay tuned for the million more episodes that are coming, and we'll see you.